Cool, we're live. Thanks everyone for joining this week's office hours. It's the ninth edition. I hope we will have Yanis later to join and talk a little bit about the vector implementation. I'm quite sure most of you are well aware of it already. But if not, oh, it's next week. Okay. Yeah, cool. Okay, so we can basically start with the usual ETH watch. Is any of you watching the new implementations of the software updates or anything interesting? I know the Berlin upgrade is coming fairly soon.
Tomorrow.
Today, yeah, or tomorrow, yeah.
There's some good notes in the agenda if you want to take a look and run through them.
Yeah.
Like Open Ethereum didn't do any further upgrade, like they released a release candidate, but that's about it.
Yeah, there's 3.2.2 release candidate one. I guess the non-release candidate, like the official one, would come after the Berlin fork, but it seems kind of weird. Geth also has a version 1.10.2 if anyone had a look at it. I've been running the Geth latest Berlin upgrade on Rinkeby, and it seems to be stable, although it eats a lot more CPU than usual for some reason.
I'm struggling to keep up to the chain head on mine since I upgraded.
Rinkeby or
yeah. I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah, no, mine is like going up to 24 cores utilization every time it tries to index the data. Like it downloads a bunch of blocks, and then when it gets to 2048 or something like that, it just nukes my CPU for some reason. I don't know why. It's kind of weird. It's the first time I see it doing it. But yeah, I just hope everything will be nice and working by the time we hit the mainnet release tomorrow. So there's one more note in here for TurboGeth, the latest release from April 2nd. Basically, wait, give me a second. Someone is posting something in the chat. I have no clue what it is. So, going back to TurboGeth, there's a release on the 2nd of April, and it seems that a lot of people having issues with keeping the alpha not like on chain head. Is it what you were talking about, or I was talking about the Rinkeby Geth earlier, Jim?
Yeah, I've seen something similar on TurboGeth as well.
Okay.
But slightly more complex, but I won't go into it right now because it's just an alpha, right? I thought maybe it was only me having the problems, but I guess not.
TurboGeth are always alphas. They don't have a stable version, from what I can see in the repo. Anyway, is there anything else we should discuss? Oh yeah, let's discuss the snapshots for Geth. I think it's a new addition. Maybe Steak Machine can talk about it.
I just had a little experience. Just a few hours ago started, and it said that it will take about 5 hours to sync the whole.
5 hours to sync the whole chain archive.
I will see if it's archived, but as mentioned in the documentation, it was full data. Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow.
So where are you actually downloading the snapshots from? Like trusted nodes or what?
Yes, it's built in the Get. So it took about a few weeks to build a snapshot inside the network, and now you just connect your node to the network, and you can ask other peers to give you snapshot information, and you then sync state, and you are good to go.
Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a really good addition to Geth. I'm just curious if you're actually downloading an archive node.
Snapshots without re-executing the transactions.
What do you mean?
Like when you download a snapshot, like what takes time is to execute all the transactions, right? Like from Genesis up to now. And when you just download a snapshot, how can it be trusted?
Yeah.
And how can you save time by just you save time by not executing the transactions? I think
This is what I was asking. Like, how do you know if the source is trusted? Like, let's say on Solana you have a few trusted nodes from the foundation that you can download snapshots from, but here, who has the authority of giving you the right data, and who verifies that the data is correct? That's the biggest question. Maybe Coin has something to say. Looks like Stake Machine also shared something. If there's anyone that can do a TLDR of it, I would be very glad instead of reading these walls of text.
I think we will see results in a few hours.
Yeah, please keep us posted. It's a really interesting topic. I really want to see it developing further.
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, if you want to understand it, it's worth reading the blog post I dropped in the chat. But the TLDR it's still based on snapshotting, but dynamic snapshots that can kind of be incrementally streamed. And yeah, at least they claim that there is a very, low set of trust assumptions that need to be made when snap syncing. So it looks great.
Coin just said it can't be archived. So, RIP, I guess.
Yeah, my understanding was it's full nodes. Yeah, I think for archive you actually need to replay the transactions.
Yeah, from what I can. Yeah.
The main difference between Snap and Warp Sync is the use of dynamic snapshotting. Definitely, yeah. Take a look at the blog post.
Yeah, I'll definitely read it after Index's office hours. I mean, even if it's just full nodes, there's still like, I don't know, close to a terabyte of data or something like that for mainnet, so it's more than welcome anyway. That's really interesting. Really cool. If you guys have anything else to say about Ethereum nodes, feel free. Otherwise, we will probably move to Repo Watch, because Goldberg posted a bunch of PRs earlier today.
Yeah, I had a question. I hope you guys can hear me. It's my first time asking a question. For the Ethereum archive node, what's the best practice for doing that? Because that's one of the pain points that we're experiencing.
Depends what specifically you're asking.
So we're hosting on AWS and Google Cloud, and setting an archive node on the cloud would be really expensive, it seems. I was just curious what other indexers were doing or if they're pulling resources together to use an archive node?
There's a bunch of people that are selling slots access to their archive nodes. We at SakeSquid, we have our own nodes, like multiple of them, hosted in a bunch of data centers. But yeah, doing it in cloud is really expensive. I really don't recommend it. You'll be paying upwards of like 5K a month, something like that.
Yeah, if you're kind of looking for hardware for archive nodes, or just generally blockchain nodes, particularly during sync, are extremely disk I/O intensive. So if you're trying to run sync on something like an EBS or network attached storage, you'll just never sync really. So yeah, you can get like local SSDs provisioned on cloud instances, but yeah, the cost is really high. So have a look at dedicated hardware. You can obviously buy the hardware and co-locate or rent it, or rent a slot or two from some of the other indexes.
Any recommendations on renting data center space? Where to go?
You can look at Hetzner, is the cheapest, but lately they had problems with provisioning the hardware because they are literally running out of chips to give to people because of the global chip shortage. So it's gonna be fun to see how things develop further. But other than Hetzner, I don't really know many providers that have like decent prices. Like the biggest problem you have is the hardware, the storage, because it requires 7 terabytes at the very, very, very least. And besides that, it needs to be SSD at the very least, if not like SATA SSD, if not NVMe's. I know Jim has a huge machine with like 14 terabytes of NVMe storage. And obviously NVMe is more than recommended because it's quite I/O intensive.
Yeah, but for perspective, like Hetzner has this one server model that they are not able to deliver anymore. AX101, I think. It comes with, I think, 2 4 terabyte NVMe's, and you can add up to 8 or so. So you just you need to have 3 of those, but then you end up around like 150 euros, including unlimited bandwidth, and the CPU is more than enough. Like you barely need more than like 4 cores, realistically maybe 8, and they give you 16. And memory, like RAM, is I never had really an issue with RAM. Despite like the older Open Ethereum versions, which always clocked the RAM and then they crashed, but usually those nodes don't do that. So that's, I think, the baseline, and from there you can get probably arbitrarily expensive going to IBM or Oracle Cloud. Well, not cloud, they have dedicated machines, but it's really difficult, I think, to get such big disks actually.
Yeah, exactly. Like the machine that Seb was talking about, you just cannot order from Hetzner at all. Indefinite waitlist, as Cone said. But generally, when you're looking at dedicated hardware providers, the challenge that I've run into is like many of them will provide reasonable cost on the hardware spec that you need, but very few will provision more than 8 terabytes of storage, which is just a necessity to run the archive node. So when you're looking for dedicated providers, probably the first thing to check is whether they can provision machines with enough high-speed SSD storage. And maybe one other thing I'll mention is when it comes to indexing, the latency between your ETH archive node and the graph node instance that is configured in index mode is really important. So you really want to minimize the latency. So running something like an archive node, you know, in like a dedicated machine, but running your graph node, you know, somewhere else where there's a reasonably high latency, it isn't going to be a great experience.
The reason why he's saying is that from my experience during a testnet, I've seen that if I have a ETH node at the other side of the world of like opposed to my graph node, the sync rate performance, like literally how fast the subgraphs sync, is going down significantly. So for example, if I have this the archive node in the same data center, I get close to max speeds on Uniswap, let's say. And from my tweakings of the subgraph itself and the database, we were hitting around 60 blocks per minute of sync time. And once I put my node on literally on the other side of the world in Tokyo, the sync rate dropped to like 5 blocks per second, which with the exact same config and everything, and even a faster machine, for if that matters.
I'm not sure like how much of an effect like this proximity to the archive nodes has in normal operation. Like once you finished syncing and then you just sync the updates, then it might not be too big of an issue. And so you can, then another option is that you can see if the subgraph you want to sync needs traces, and if it doesn't, then you can just rent some like 2 terabyte machine, and in 3 days you quickly sync a TurboGas.
What 3
you
days?
Can also just
like literally 1 day and a
3
half.
days. Yeah, like you can even go to something like Vultr or so, like these cloud hosters, and what about Linode? I think with Linode you get like big enough disks, and then you just sync one of these nodes and you pay like $80 per day, and then you quickly sync your subgraph because you're in proximity, and then maybe stream the updates in from your archive node further away, maybe. Also, you can rent archive nodes from, what was it? QuickNode, I think. QuickNode had like trace-enabled parity nodes with EIP. They probably upgraded also to Open Ethereum now. That you can kind of deploy everywhere in the world for like $1,500 per month. Then you're not super close to it, but there are always options. Like $1,500 is still better than hosting yourself.
Right. Okay. So it's best to have your graph node co-located with your Ethereum archive node, right? Unless if they're fully synced, then updates would be less.
Yeah. To kind of, to build an intuition for it, you can imagine that every subgraph is making a series of synchronous requests to the archive node. So any latency in that path is going to directly impact sync speed on an individual subgraph. That said, like if you were trying to sync like 1,000 subgraphs at the same time, you might be able to saturate an ETH node because none of those ETH node calls would have interdependency, so they'll be paralyzed. But yeah, if you want to rapidly sync historical data for a subgraph, then proximity is really important. But yeah, beyond that, when you're just staying up to date with the tip of the chain, it's the synchronous latency just matters less because it's still tiny compared to block times.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate your response on this question.
I think it's one of our favorite questions always.
All right, cool. Anything else you guys want to discuss around the ETH nodes, or can we move forward? I guess we can move forward. Goldberg posted a bunch of PRs earlier today, maybe we can
Yeah, so
chat about that.
yeah, someone said like if you sync like 1,000 subgraphs in parallel, which we
512.
didn't, but yeah, it's possible. Like I basically went through all the pull requests that happened in the last week, and I kind of got a feeling for what the team is working on every week, because it's changing a little bit. Like the last weeks were mostly around sharding and like this vector implementation, and this week there's nothing really about sharding. So I actually wanted to ask Giannis if he was here, if we can actually try it already. And it feels like we are more getting to like multi-chain support and like smaller bug fixes and upgrades of like dependencies to probably be ready for the next step and some kind of major rollout of more subgraphs to support. Like I posted a bunch of links, but it's more or less, it says nothing really important, I would say. I mean, everything is important, but it's not that it really gives us like new features to try. It's more like documenting what's the current topic, and this is like an upgrade of some libraries that lead to problems. And now that it became important to support more than 512 subgraphs again, so I think the limit is somewhere around 2,000 subgraphs in parallel.
I think that upgrade must have been done like specifically for the hosted service to support it, but maybe Ford can correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah, so I haven't been too close on some of those graph node developments, but from what I understand, we upgraded Tokyo, which is the platform that we use for the asynchronous runtime, and that led to some issues with parallel processing, and that's why we had that update to allow for 500 subgraphs in parallel, which, you know, in the past and many times we've had many more subgraphs than that on a graph node. And then the other ones are small updates to allow for discrepancies in new chains, you know, so like not panicking the node if there's discrepancies in the Genesis block, and then using separate watchers per chain.
Cool, interesting.
And then someone a minute ago asked about the sharding. We talked about that a good amount, and I think it was it the last office hours or the one before? So I would recommend revisiting that conversation maybe. And to answer your question, it's definitely something that you can start working on your index nodes if you want to try it. It's being used in the hosted service and has been for, I want to say, like a month and a half or two.
Yeah, he was more asking if the updates are live, but I believe so with the latest graph node.
If it's around sharding, that's supported with the latest graph node, and there's some documentation in the graph node repo under the docs folder.
That's definitely some interesting experiment.
Cool, then we're done with the repo watches. And is there anything else you guys want to discuss around this, or can we move forward? Oh, interesting. But I guess this one isn't that complex. But I see it's basically a some kind of an old config, because like right now we still have 120 seconds of Oh, it's for the indexing service. Never mind. Yeah. Cool. Interesting. So I guess with that out of the way, do you guys want to discuss briefly about the vector implementation? I know Yanis will be joining next week, but we can probably just kickstart some kind of discussion around it today and continue next week with it. Yeah. So yeah, what we've done on the vector node stuff at Steak Squid, we just implemented the Docker way in the Docker compose file, but instead of the config file being like just written from the an actual file, we were plugging it in through a JSON string. But other than that, there's not that big of a difference. Ideally is to be very careful on the environment variables that you use. You can check our Docker Compose file. Everything seems to be working normally now and has been for a while, like except the fact that I wasn't running the correct Rinkeby node. But when it was working very fine. Is it one container? So it's one container, yes. You have the vector node which that communicates with the indexer agent and the database.
How can we check that it's working?
That's a really good question. I was just checking the vector logs until I was changing environment variables over and over until I managed to make it not show errors anymore. It was literally just walking in the dark because I have no clue what I was doing. I didn't know what to look for and what to check other than just logs and errors. When the errors went away and everything looked green, I guess it was the point where it started working.
I don't have any errors, but can we understand if it's serving the queries or doing exact work?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I should caveat, I have not undertaken this work yet, but my uninformed opinion would be, the indexer service obviously exposes telemetry around the state channels messages that are being successfully received and acted upon. So if the vector deployment is hooked up to testnet, the testnet gateway should be using vector-based state channels, and so if the telemetry looks good, I would imagine it's probably working.
Great. Now I need to add my Grafana dashboards to automation. The last step.
Yeah.
My question is, but probably there's no one to give me an answer. Where does this vector node stand in the machine architecture? Do we need multiple nodes for scaling? Do we need multiple service nodes for scaling and stuff like that? But I think I should wait for next week to ask Yanis. Yeah, I mean, last time around we had to use multiple service nodes, and then to have slightly better scaling. But with this vector node, I don't know if I should just put it also on to hit a load balancer in between, a separate load balancer to handle the communication between it and it's really complex.
I think
right now it hits the service nodes directly. I don't know if it needs to hit all of them or if it needs to just hit one and then it works. Sorry, the agent. It hits the agent. But the service nodes also communicate with the vector node. So yeah, I have absolutely no clue how to scale it up if needed, or if it even needs scaling up. But yeah, let's leave these questions for the next week.
Yeah, those are good questions. I think it would be best to have Giannis answer those. I'll try to relay them so he can prepare beforehand. But I would also like to note that we should, do some extensive testing on testnet and start out with one vector node and one indexer service and see what kind of volume we can get, and then start scaling from there.
All right, cool. That's good to know. Yeah, we definitely need a lot of testing on the testnet because, like, right now I don't think like more than 20% of the indexers are aware of what's about to come, and we should make everyone aware and start testing it on testnet because, like, the software itself won't work on mainnet once the vector releases. Like, the old implementations of the agent and service won't work, and it's gonna be really problematic if people don't care about it.
Yeah, we probably need to do an awareness piece on this.
Yeah.
We can maybe talk about that offline, and maybe it will come up next week as well with Janice.
Like, what's the time frame in this? Like, when is the rollout planned? And other question, can we also like just order some heavy traffic on testnet to play with the scaling?
Yanis is working with individual indexers right now. I imagine that'll scale up over the next week or so.
Yeah, Giannis is kind of in the deep work mode right now. So if we can all try to allow him to have that space for the next week, and then I think as soon as possible, we'd like to really start ramping up traffic on the testnet. And if more and more of you can start setting up your vector nodes over the next week or two, that would be super helpful.
I have like 3 that I need to update.
Will we see traffic in mainnet before vector?
I don't have a definitive plan there, but I don't think so.
I'd like to ask a little bit more about the vector node. That's the first time I hear of it. Particularly on Sunday, I was going through the Terraform script, and I did all the steps, and then it was asking me for the token for managing the vector node. And that was the first time I ever heard of it, because I read through all the documentation. It didn't mention anything about a vector node.
All the vector stuff is for testnet only as for now, and everyone is really recommended to give it a shot and to run it, because it will come to mainnet at some point. So if you're trying to set your infrastructure up for mainnet, you don't need vector stuff. I mean, you shouldn't actually be running any vector stuff on mainnet. There's a link, I don't know if anyone has it handy, with all the versions that are used for mainnet and for the testnet, and there's different versions. I believe mainnet for agent and service stops at version 10. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
I think the question was about admin token. So we should generate it on our own, and it's just a random data, or
yes,
we should use some state.
That's what I did. It's just a random string for the admin token. A string of your choice.
So in the Terraform script that's in the documentation, it prompts me for a token for managing the vector node. Do I just press enter and don't put a value, or
are you trying to deploy to testnet or mainnet?
Mainnet.
Yeah, then go back. It surprises me that the Terraform scripts and stuff have been updated already, but go back to the versions that specify indexer server and indexer agent 0.10. And then, yeah, effectively, like what is the vector node is built into indexer service, so the state channel's implementation for handling query payments. And then, yeah, join the testnet and help us test out the vector implementation.
Okay, thank you.
Again, just to make it clear, vector stuff goes to testnet. Non-vector stuff, as in indexer agent and service version 10, goes to mainnet. Anything above version 10 is testnet only for now, but it's highly recommended that you join the testnet and learn how to use and how to navigate around the vector stuff, because it will be becoming really important very soon.
Yeah, I'd just like to plus one at some kind of timeline, because obviously the state channel implementation is really important to test with a high degree of rigor. And yeah, in terms of like the timelines of bringing mainnet subgraphs into the decentralized network, yeah, without much more information, that feels like a tight timeline if we're still targeting April.
I think we would still need Giannis to answer these questions.
Yeah.
I'd like to give a more detailed explanation of what's to come. Is there anyone here that managed to start up the vector node without Docker? Like, I know Docker at some point is a part of it, but like on bare metal, a part of
apart from me, I've got the dev. I've got it running in dev mode, and I've just got it connected to Graph so far. And there is a few things you need to change, and I don't know that I'm fully. I can't test it yet. I need to talk to Ford about that, because I know Ford, you've deployed the reference build as well out of the repo. It's relatively pain-free, actually. If anyone's looking to just get a head start and not worry too much about the Graph side, get into the vector deployment on the repo right now. It's very easy to get started.
Yeah, from what I've understand and what things you run into, did yours was trying to use some old versions of the contract or something?
Oh, that's something to do with my Graph infrastructure.
Oh,
that's nothing to do with Vector. And just to be clear, the Vector implementation uses Docker a lot for various reasons that really make sense. It's a very complex stack. You can't avoid using Docker. It is just the way it's been deployed. That's what the team use. And there's very good reasons, architectural reasons for why they've done that. And if you read the documentation, it's kind of clear why.
On the Docker side of the things, I would really recommend anyone trying to learn how the Graph infrastructure works and have a really easy way to set things up to look at our implementation for the testnet. Is literally pain-free, and you get it up and running within 10 minutes. Like, most of the time you'd be waiting for stuff to compile instead of just thinking about how stuff works. You just need to fill up a start. Chris, the mainnet repo still needs some work, but the testnet one has all the vector stuff in it. Yeah. And you literally just need to fill out a start file with all your passwords and mnemonics and whatever, and just bash start, and it will work, assuming you have no port conflicts and a working archive node. So yeah, that's the easiest way to get started on the testnet in case you want to set it up quickly. Is there anything else you guys want to discuss around the vector stuff, or should we move forward? Okay, I guess that's all for vector, surprisingly. Yeah, Jim, we definitely need to make people aware of the changes that are going to come to mainnet soon.
Yeah, let's have a discussion with Martin and Alex about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Alright, well, wait, Cohen asked something. Are there specific parts in the vector docs? I've been clawing through the docs plus code and haven't encountered what you mentioned. Jim, that's something you can answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what he's asking. Just try deploying it, watch how it deploys. Throw it in a VM and deploy it in a VM.
And yeah, Jim, you're saying in Docker in a VM.
Correct, nested. So you'll need to turn on nesting on some hypervisors, whatever you're using. It's, trust me, I'm no Docker fan, although that's where I'm going eventually. It's no big deal. Once you get, through the install, it really isn't a big deal.
Awesome. Cool then, let's move forward and leave the other vector stuff for the next week. I'm really keen to have a discussion with Yanis around this. Next thing that maybe we could discuss, and maybe Ford can come up with some things here. Can we discuss about the PancakeSwap incident from yesterday? Like, what is making PancakeSwap so slow, and what like how would you index PancakeSwap on mainnet? And if indexers have any ideas to like ideals they intend to stick around specific chains and the trade-offs. From what I could understand is that the subgraph is very slow because it literally just cloned Uniswap, and Uniswap is slow by default because it's not so well optimized, but it works fine with like a 12 or 14 seconds block time on Ethereum. But if you cut that block time by 10x, it's going to be problematic.
What's the block time on BSC?
I don't know, 2 seconds or something like that.
Yeah, I believe it averages out to around 3 seconds, so it's like a 5x change from Ethereum mainnet.
That the gas limit per block is also a lot higher than Ethereum. So if you're just looking at like the net amount of gas per second that the chain processes, it's huge, beyond Ethereum.
So they're finding out why gas limits exist, basically. It sounds like.
Yes.
Wow.
It also sounds like Binance nodes themselves are falling behind, so this isn't necessarily a graph issue. There's a lot of optimizations they could be making on their end.
Yeah, I saw Adam Cochran's breakdown of the public nodes. But Cohen had some. Cohen, is your mic working? You had some comments on that yourself.
Doesn't seem like his mic was working, but he had mentioned to me that he had some trouble running BSC nodes on his own infrastructure just in testing. Since his mic's not working, maybe you could write some info in the chat, Cohen.
I wonder how big an archive node on BSC is after half a year of.
It grows up by 500 gigs a month or something like that. I don't know. Cohen mentioned it at some point, but I can't really remember.
Yeah, because Cohen, basically the reason we're all saying Cohen is because Cohen runs services for people that use PancakeSwap or use BSC, so he sees He sees the details, the dirty details. There you go. 0.9 to 2.3 terabytes in 2 months.
Wow.
Can they migrate to TurboGuest maybe?
That's absolutely insane, dude. Like within a year, it will surpass Ethereum by a lot. Holy crap. They literally won't
at
have
Hetzner, like 27 gigabyte, 27 terabyte you can buy at Hetzner, then there's the end.
Yeah, max you can go at 37 terabytes of the NVMe. Yeah, you're right. But wow, that's absolutely mind-blowing.
So yeah, you guys can see how there's a whole host of compounding, performance affecting factors here. There's the block times, the sheer number of transactions that can be included in each block, and the high activity on PancakeSwap. So their block processing times are pretty high. And then they're using contracts that I believe are the same as Uniswap, and Subgraph is the same. So, if they're going to really handle this kind of volume, they'll probably have to update their Subgraph to not use contract calls, which Uniswap uses heavily, not use block handlers. And in order to do that, they might need to update their contracts so their contracts emit more data from each event. Also, there's some work maybe on the front end to better work with caching, because the graph node cache is less effective because a block comes out every 3 seconds instead of 15 seconds. So the cache is only good for 3 seconds. That effectively makes the load on the database, at least 5x what it would be.
Oh boy.
That's incredible.
Dare I say part of the problem is, the appropriation of technology that was not fully understood.
Absolutely, which is why one of the agenda items here as part of this discussion is, do indexers here run with ideals when it comes to the different chains you might index? Or is everyone here a profit maximalist? Is anyone willing to dip into that discussion?
I won't touch BSC as an indexer, and I think there's just like an impending existential crisis. I mean, you can see with state growth at the rate that it's happening, there will be no BSC archive nodes in a short period of time. It's just an unsustainable chain, unfortunately.
Yeah, same here. Won't touch it. More so from the fundamental perspective that I don't like highly centralized chains. But yeah, that's a very personal decision here.
And that can certainly be said about BSC, but I do think it poses like an interesting challenge, because if we look at Phantom, for example, that team is very strong and they have actually brought real innovation to the table. So I certainly have less ideological concerns about something like Phantom, but they do similarly support a much higher kind of net gas per second. And yeah, I think as indexes, we're going to have to think of strategies to deal with that for the kind of legitimate high-speed chains that are starting to see more and more traction.
Assumedly, this is an issue as well, Chris, for all layer 2 stuff.
Yeah, I think, the kind of dirty secret of all off-chain scaling solutions is that none of them solve state growth. That is going to be a real challenge, particularly for indexes that need full archive data.
Put them on Arweave. Problem solved. But yeah, I do understand what the issue will be.
You still have to read the data from Arweave and then derive state data from it, right?
Yeah.
Arweave stores transactions and then you have to replay those transactions somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I'm really curious, with stuff like Solana, which is basically just cutting off the ledger from some point. What could be the best choice of going I imagine an archive node of Solana is huge.
I mean, here's a crazy idea. Imagine some future where graph indexes could actually do something like a snap sync of pre-computed state from other indexers. Maybe even via state channel payments, paying a fee for that. So new indexes have a way of bootstrapping their state database, and existing indexes can monetize the work that they've already done.
That's an absolutely brilliant idea.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea.
Like one way around needing an archive node, like just in theory, but when you kind of deploy a smart contract and immediately say, I want to index this via subgraph, then in theory, you can get by with full nodes, right? Like you don't need all the state before, and you will never touch the state again for this smart contract or the subgraph. And you just need the latest data.
I believe full nodes versus archive nodes also miss a few RPC calls that were otherwise being used in gathering that data around. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Ford can have something to say.
Yeah, it's mostly the ETH calls, so contract calls as of a historic block, but full nodes will work for those calls. They just typically remove that state, I believe, after 50 blocks or 200 blocks. So theoretically, if you have that situation where the contract just launched and you start syncing it and you were never behind by more than 50 blocks, you may be able to get away with a full node, but you're kind of running a risky game there.
Yeah. As soon as your graph infrastructure goes down for like half an hour, you're done.
You can actually tweak that parameter, as in you can set an arbitrary kind of prune threshold. So, you could tweak that to a day or 2 weeks. Whatever.
Interesting.
Another interesting idea that has been floated and I think would be effective is to rely more on the database. So the ETH node is used to get full blocks. And then instead of various subgraphs making duplicate calls to the node, once a block is in the database, then the graph node could then query the database instead of the ETH client, which would be a pretty big lift, but I think is a good direction to move in for the graph node.
That's cool to hear. Yeah.
This is a bit of a different topic, but yeah, something I've been thinking about for a while is like how incredibly dependent the entire Ethereum ecosystem is on Etherscan. Like denormalized block and transaction data is so important. And I remember a while ago trawling through.
Your voice interrupted.
Yeah, for some time there's been discussion. I know Yanis has been heavily involved in some kind of inbuilt subgraph that does more general block and transaction indexing and would actually index the kind of data that you would find on Etherscan. And I'm wondering, how much does that fit into the vision and roadmap for GraphNode? And, I say that mostly recognizing that as great as Etherscan is, we need alternatives.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty clear that will be on the roadmap, and I would suggest it. You mentioned some work, and there has been some work in GraphNode to create a built-in, basically like a block explorer subgraph that has its own code path to make that more efficient. Otherwise, it could take honestly many months if it was set up like a normal subgraph. That's actually much of that work is done, and it's been kind of deprioritized. But there's a lot of additional work that would have to be done to then use that data for other subgraphs. I imagine that could fit nicely into some work that's planned in the near future around what we're calling subgraph composition, where you could have a subgraph that then queries other subgraphs. But if you guys have ideas there and goals, like definitely float them on Discord or in the forum.
It's really great to hear that.
Sounds like a nice new programming model approaching.
Cool. We're 1 minute away from overtime here. Is there anything else you guys want to discuss, like really quick, before we wrap up this call?
Be here next week for Janice's vector presentation. Is going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that said, I guess we can wrap this call up. See you guys next week. Thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, I really hope we will see you next week with Yanis on the call and to talk about Vector more in more details.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.